morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's MarkMonitor webinar, Brand Abuse Lurking on Social Media, Uncovering the Hidden Risk, where we'll be discussing important new strategies for protecting your brand across social media and other digital channels. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to run everyone through a few housekeeping items. During today's webinar, only the host will be able to see the list of all attendees. All participants' lines will be muted to ensure there is no background noise. Following our presentation, we will be holding a Q&A session. If you have a question at any time for our speaker during the presentation, feel free to submit it using the Q&A tab located on your screen. You can also submit your questions at the end of the session. For any questions our speakers won't have time to answer today, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the event. We are recording today's webinar, and we plan to send out a follow-up email to all registrants with a link to the recording and presentation slides within the next couple of days. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We are joined by MarkMonitor brand protection experts Kyle Sale and Akino Chikada. Kyle brings a broad skill set and valuable experience to the MarkMonitor team. Having worked in global Fortune 100 companies as well as VC-funded startups, Kyle brings a well-rounded background to the product management team. At MarkMonitor, Kyle drives the product vision and strategy, developing the business rationale around investment choices and identifying and quickly reacting to emerging market trends. He works with our designers to validate product concepts with customers and works with our developers to deliver market-defining products and solutions. Akino Chikada is a senior product marketing manager for the MarkMonitor brand protection solutions. She started her career in public relations and marketing in London and has worked in Europe, Asia, and the United States. She has led and served interim roles in global marketing strategies, product marketing, events management, public relations, corporate communications, and regional marketing. Akino holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University College of London, a Master of Science from the London School of Economics, and has trilingual fluency in English, Italian, and Japanese. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Akino to get us started.
Thank you, Gina. So today we're going to be talking about social media. Kyle and I will be co-presenting, and I will start by covering the current landscape, and then both Kyle and I will cover some of the challenges that brand owners experience through social media. Last but not least, Kyle will offer recommendations and best practices. So let's start by talking about brand protection in an omni-channel world. A customer expects an authentic and consistent experience with a brand across all channels. And what do I mean by across all channels? Well, whether it's online or offline, if it's in person, like a store or a bank, or if it's online when a customer accesses the direct website, mobile app, or social media, the expectation is that their experience remains consistent. And unfortunately, the truth is that if they do end up having a negative experience in even one of the channels, that actually has an impact, a real impact, to your brand's online efforts. Fraudsters will leverage your legitimate brand to monetize, and the impact is that if they end up, causing some kind of an issue or scamming one of your customers to a counterfeit site or a fraudulent page, then that does directly impact your customer's experience. So creating an all-encompassing brand protection strategy across all your channels is very important. So as mentioned, today we're going to focus on social media, as social media continues to be very relevant. Lots of new content is being posted and shared amongst millions of users. Companies use it as a key marketing tool to promote their brands, and consumers embrace this. They almost become like ambassadors to your company, and they share their experiences, their thoughts, any promotions or deals that you're promoting. They share that with their friends, families, and colleagues. And looking at the stats, so 74% of consumers rely on social media to guide their purchases. I know I fall into one of these categories, but it's definitely really important for people to look at it. It's definitely important for companies to make sure that their page remains visible, and as mentioned before, the look and feel and the message should be consistent across all those channels. So to further qualify how relevant social media is today, I think the proof is really in the numbers and statistics. It really says it all. The graph that you're looking at is somewhat dated. That's April 2014. But if we take Instagram as an example, Instagram grew 50% between March to December, and it claims to have 300 million people using the photo app every month. And if we look at Facebook, it has also grown, and from 1.23 billion, it's grown to 1.35 billion users. I think what's really interesting about Facebook is that in June 2014, Facebook served more videos than YouTube. And I think a lot of that has to do with the autoplay feature that definitely has contributed to the statistics. But in any case, this is significant. Also, Tumblr is growing at a tremendous pace with 120,000 users signing up every single day. So overall, it's not just the number of users, but it's also how the users are engaging with these platforms. People are spending more hours every day on these platforms, and what I find interesting is that statistics showing that people are using more than 2 social media platforms on a regular basis. So what does that really mean? That really means as more people are embracing it and using these social media platforms, it also means that there's more opportunities for fraudsters to take advantage of this. And not only that, but whether it's intentional or not intentional, it does pave the way for potential brand abuse. So for brand owners, it's really important to keep in mind of all the different types of challenges that you'll experience. So listed here, you'll see a few examples that both Kyle and I will talk about in further details. Kyle's going to talk about freedom of speech, impersonation fan pages, and promotions of selling counterfeit goods. And then I'll talk about fraud, fake special offers, and also new social media sites that are emerging. So with that, I'll pass it to Kyle.
Thank you, Akino. I appreciate the introduction and the overview of current landscape. So yeah, what we want to do is talk through a little bit about the different challenges that social media provides. And we know that social media is a double-edged sword. So there's a ton of content being curated, created, and pushed through social media channels that are very value additive to the brand. And as Akino referenced, there's activity that occurs in the social media space, sometimes very much intentionally nefarious, that distracts from the brand, steals traffic, drives towards counterfeiting, but sometimes it's also accidental or not as nefarious as people want to believe. And one of those areas is freedom of speech, right? So we know any of us that's ever gone on Facebook, Twitter, and particularly looked in the comments section of someone's post about a current hot political topic or recent sporting event will know that there is unabashedly pure freedom of speech on social media. So how does your brand respond to that when issues come up that people are saying things about your brand that you don't appreciate, that are untrue, or that may be true and you just haven't had a chance to deal with yet? So I think what we recommend is really monitoring what's being said about your brand overall. That's kind of obvious. But really then picking your battles and picking the means by which you fight that battle. So knowing when to engage disparaging remarks and how to engage those. So oftentimes in social media, there's sort of back channel and private ways to deal with those remarks and those people driving those remarks, and it's good to try to get to those early, contain them. I actually had a personal experience where I was just having a horrible time with a services company I was dealing with, and I took to Twitter and said, has anyone else had this problem? This is absolutely infuriating me. So I wasn't actually being terribly disparaging. I was venting frustration. And to my shock, the company direct messaged me on Twitter, set me up with a customer service representative, solved my problem, and then encouraged me to retweet out, thanks for solving my problem, which I did gladly. So the means by which you choose to engage those kind of freedom of speech items can really help or hinder your brand, and it can also really help you as a listener to what the pulse of the market is, what people are thinking and saying about your brand. So another area we see, which is definitely not accidental, is impersonation. And impersonation can take many different forms. So some people will want to directly impersonate your brand for the purpose of deceiving consumers. Some people are, start off with good intentions. They're a major fan of your brand or your products. They're excited about them, and they sort of have a personal, we all have some products that we kind of personally associate with, and people will build a fan page that might evolve into an impersonation page that then people might hijack to use for less than positive means. But I mean, the question on the top of the slide is obviously redundant. Yeah, impersonation can be very hurtful, right? So one of the ways that you, as a brand owner or product owner, are hurt by impersonation is you're doing a very good job of creating new and fresh marketing campaigns, driving content, hosting webinars, doing all the things that you need to do to drive clicks and traffic to your landing pages. And these impersonation pages can divert that traffic. And so people don't get to the end landing point that you want them to get to, which hurts you, obviously, from a traffic perspective, but then it also ends up hurting the end consumer as they don't get to the place that they thought they were going to. And so one big danger here is when you see fan pages that have significantly more likes or followers or commenters than the actual brand's social media site. And another big danger is, social media is very much compounding and exponential. So as I see something and click on it and like it or forward it to my friends, 10 of my friends like it, they forward it to 10 of their friends, and all of a sudden we just have this massive exponential matrix of disinformation or deceitful information being disseminated out to the internet that you don't have any control of. And this is very much how, counterfeiting and people who are diverting gray market goods will use this strategy in particular. But the problem is that once your reputation is damaged in this way, it's very hard to build it back up. So here's an example of impersonation, and it's hard to have sort of animations on these webinars, so we can't have these different sites just pop up and see them side by side. But what you see is a very thoughtful strategy of impersonation is people will use your own, trademarked assets, your logos, your product pictures. They'll steal those off your website. They'll use them on their own social media sites. And then they'll create sites that, use your brand name, your product name. It'll look very much like your products, but just with a slight variation, right? So here we see in the fruit shoot juice, we've got people that are proposing to have a site that represents fruit shoot juice in a different country or region or with a slightly different product. So it's not that they're 100% just hijacking your brand and your landing pages, your social media pages. They're taking the assets that you've worked hard to cultivate and trademark and grow consciousness of, and then they're tweaking them slightly so that people are tricked by the confidence of seeing something that's familiar but not exactly the same. And so counterfeiting, oftentimes a lot of the diversionary tactics and traffic being driven ends up in the counterfeiting space. Or as Akino will show, there's a lot of fraud that goes with identity theft and credit card theft and those kinds of things. but counterfeiters, particularly, from what we have seen, view social media as a very safe haven for the reasons I've already described. It's easy to imitate a brand or impersonate a brand. It's easy to, once you start diverting traffic, there's that exponential compounding effect where all of a sudden they're driving a significant amount of traffic to their impersonated site, and now they have the opportunity to land people outside of where you would want them to land in a safe e-commerce environment and start selling them counterfeited goods through payment processors that are not, your vetted, trusted payment processors. And particularly even as different social media sites we're seeing are now allowing people to set up their own stores within the social media sites. So it just becomes very confusing to a consumer. And confusion, counterfeiters prey on confusion. So here's another example of a counterfeited goods site. So we've sort of blurred out some of the logos, but this is a brand that I think a lot of us on the call would recognize. And again, what's happening here is the counterfeiter has set up a site that looks very similar to the actual brand site, showing products that are actually from that brand's page. They've just lifted those products, and they're just making it look like a very subtle variety of that actual brand, being something being manufactured and sold in a different region with just a different product name. But if you're not paying close attention, or you've followed different retweeted messages from your friends saying, hey, here's a great deal on this product, click here to go to this site, all of a sudden you feel very comfortable as a consumer being led down this path, and now you're in a position to buy counterfeit product. So I'll turn it back over to Akino so that she can continue to walk you through some of the challenges that we're seeing today in social media.
Thanks, Kyle. So I'll talk about fraud. So more specifically, phishing scams. So a fraudster, the bad guy, is going to look to steal credentials. So that's personal information, whether it's your username, login, password. It could even be as deep as like credit card information or driver's license. But regardless, the end goal here is not counterfeit, but the end goal here is stealing credentials. And they use different types of tactics in social media to do that. So they'll either insert themselves in a conversation, and especially like customer service conversations, they'll just take part of that conversation and direct people to a phishing URL site. Also impersonation, as Kyle mentioned, one of the tactics is impersonation, but when they create an impersonating page, then they could add links to their phishing sites or whatever fraudulent scheme that they're putting into play. And the other tactic that we're seeing more and more of is hashtag phishing scams. So in my next slide, I'll actually show you an example of this. But one thing I really wanted to highlight is that when it comes to fraud, it's not always clear how the fraudster is actually going to monetize. And the impact may not be as obvious at first sight, but it is a serious issue that really impacts the consumer, and it's definitely a problem that business owners and brand owners definitely want to stay away from. So as promised, I said I'd talk about hashtag phishing. Here's an example. There are just two screenshots here, but if you look at the one on the right-hand side, it says, who's familiar with X Bank? Interested in $5,000? Double tap. And if you read the fine print, it says, if you bank with X Bank, you can make $5,000 cash now. Must have your online account information, text me now. And there's a phone number that people can instantly text. Now, especially there are vulnerable people out there that desperately need $5,000, and what they'll do is that they'll recognize the bank, and then if they are part of that bank, then they'll want to associate, they'll believe in it, they'll, lots of gullible people out there. So they might believe in this and contact and text. what they don't realize is that this is really a money laundering scheme, and there are serious consequences if someone falls victim to this kind of fraudulent attack, whether their bank account gets entirely cleared out or, they may even get arrested for being money mules. So there are significant implications to things like this. For hashtag phishing in particular, this is something that we're seeing in the financial industry, but phishing scams in general via social media is happening whether or not you're in the financial industry or not. So it is something that brand owners should be aware of. Now, the next challenge is fake special offers. What's really scary about fake special offers is that word of mouth spreads very quickly. And I know I'm definitely one of these people, but if there's a great deal that I find, I definitely want to know about it, and I'm definitely more than happy to share it with my friends, family, colleagues, and, not all of them are legitimate. So for illegitimate, fake special offers, it's really hard for people to identify. And one of the key reasons why it's so difficult to identify it is because it comes and goes pretty quickly. So some scams are up there for just a few hours and then taken down, and then it might pop up somewhere else. The end result, though, is that no matter what, as a consumer, you're going to end up blaming the actual brand for that. They're going to associate that fake special offer with that brand, and then it unfortunately leaves a horrible taste of mouth when that happens. So here's an example. It's a 500 pounds voucher, free voucher, which is almost the equivalent of $770 US. So that's a lot of money, and I know that a lot of people would be like, what? There's an opportunity to win 500 pounds? No problem, let me sign up for this opportunity. There are also other schemes that I've seen with airlines, for example. Some of them is promoting a survey. So people would have to fill out a survey to win a free airplane ride anywhere in the world. And for something like that, I actually fell victim to this once, which is very sad to admit. However, it was one of the surveys that were never ending. So like after 30 minutes, I realized it was a scam, but let me just say, it definitely left a bitter feeling in my mouth. And, even if you realize it's a scam, that negative association is still left with that brand owner, and it's definitely something that brands want to be aware of such problems. Now, last but not least, and I'm sure this is a struggle, is the constant of new social media sites emerging. So it's really hard to keep up with all these new social media platforms. They're the ones that we know are core to our business, and I know many marketing people have a cohesive and comprehensive marketing strategy around some of these social media platforms. However, there are all these new ones emerging. So how do you keep up with that, and how do you make sure that you are protecting your brand? And the one advice here is that it's really important that even if you don't have a marketing strategy around it, at least proactively defend yourself, register on all these different emerging social media sites that are coming up. Because even if you don't do anything on it, at least you're keeping that, and it's preventing fraudsters from coming and creating their own fan page or impersonating page or anything that could possibly be misleading and then eventually harmful to your brand. So that's one advice I'd give. And Kyle is going to be walking you through other recommendations.
Yep, thanks, Akino. So now that we've kind of seen the landscape of social media, we've seen the different challenges that social media presents to our brands, we'll walk you through some of the recommendations we've had, and I think we've kind of hinted at those along the way, but we'll talk in a little bit more specificity here as we go through this. So, I mean, one of the primary things that we recommend people do is actually coming up with a policy. So it sounds simple, but you'd be surprised at how many companies don't have an official policy around social media. And so when we say a policy, that encompasses a lot of different things. And the first thing is kind of what Akino was just alluding to about how do you even know which social media sites to register, is locating sort of that authority of approval of who can register sites, who owns the logon and handles for those sites, and which sites are approved for the company to use. So it's easy to monitor for brand abuse when you have a list of sites that you say, okay, these are the ones we approved, and I'm seeing someone impersonating my brand or talking about my brand on this social media network that is not part of our program, right? So that's a simple thing you can do. And then the policy sort of can evolve to say who has access to these, how do we use these, have we built templates around our social media, the sites that we use on social media? So, you know, a marketing best practice is to have a common kind of branding board with a common look and feel and theme that represents your brand across all social media networks, has similar names and handles across social media networks. So those are all the kind of things that you could think about from a policy perspective. And then that policy can, you know, be very focused on who internally in your organization is working with and within social media. And then if you have resellers or affiliates or partners, you can extend that policy to make consideration for how that extended team is also interacting with your social media sites. And again, Akino referenced, you know, the continued growing adoption of social media, and with growing adoption of the core sites that we all recognize, there's all these new sites popping up trying to be the next big thing. So it makes a lot of sense to go out and proactively register those social media sites just to make sure that no one else can register them leveraging your brand names and your trademark names. And at MarkMonitor, so actually my history with MarkMonitor is I started on our domain registrar side of the business, and that's a policy we advocate in the domain world as well, right? So it's very much akin to domain squatting, it's social media squatting. And then the more you register, the more you're protecting, the more you're able to monitor what's happening in your name. And the nice thing in social media, there's a lot of tools. You know, we provide tools, and there's other tools out there that you can search for brand strings and keywords and keep a pulse on what's happening, being said about your brand or how your brand is being used. So one area that we see people, you know, oftentimes people have a decent handle, no pun intended, on their social media internally, and where things can get out of control quickly is with their partners on social media. So again, the first bullet point goes back, you know, it's synonymous with the first bullet point of the last slide. You really do need to have a policy that you can work with your partners on social media. And building out those templates, you know, it's one thing to internally control your brand, but it's, you know, I think we all tremble with fear when we sort of let our brand out into the wild and other people are touching our brand. And again, particularly in social media where the consequences can be exponential and can get out of control quite quickly. You want to make sure that you have very specific and hardened and approved templates for how your partners can use social media and use your brand on social media. And one of the best practices that we've seen that, you know, builds confidence both for you as a brand owner and the consumer and their experience is that you really need to control where the traffic is being sent. So you want to be able to, A, ensure that it's, particularly in an e-commerce world, you want to be driving it back to your marketplaces, to your own proprietary owned stores, or if you have approved, you know, resellers and vendors, you want to make sure the traffic is headed there. But monitoring where that traffic goes and making sure that it's going to the places that you assume it's going to is a big deal. And then constantly just monitoring those affiliates and partners to make sure that they're, you know, adhering to the policies, that they're doing things according to the way you want your brand represented is always a best practice. And I think one key takeaway is, we've talked about it throughout the presentation. Social media really does impact reputation and it impacts how people feel about our brand. And one bad experience can really tarnish you. So your partner's reputation is directly linked to your reputation. So having a strategy for how to manage those partners is critical. One quick thing that we just wanted to highlight as well is the different way that social media, these are kind of the core primary social media sites, but their enforcement policies. So those sites do have mechanisms for how you can deal with all of the different challenges that we spoke about today. So you can, often every one of these sites has a way that you can, there's a form you can fill out to say, look, my trademark is being infringed upon, my copyrights are being infringed upon. I'm being impersonated, and then it gets a little murkier when it gets down to counterfeit, fraud, sort of some other activities. And so within our systems, we have some automated ways to take care of those, and then there's also manual ways that we have relationships that we can leverage. But you do have recourse, right? So it's not like if somebody is doing something nefarious against your brand, then you just have to figure out a way to kind of deal with it from a PR perspective. You do have recourse for your legal counsel to engage with the social media sites and get something taken down, removed, and dealt with. But again, once that's happened, the damage has kind of been done reputationally, but you do have an avenue for dealing with it. So I'm going to turn the slides back over to Akino, but we're happy to take questions, and I think Gina can walk us through that process.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle and Akino. So we are ready to open it up for our Q&A session. As a quick reminder, if you have any questions, just submit them via the Q&A tab on your screen. So I'll just take a look at the questions now. So the first one, how much impact does social media have to e-commerce?
Wow, that's a really great question. Thanks, Gina. I'd say social media has a tremendous impact to e-commerce, and in fact, I think that's growing. It's funny, yesterday I was just reading an interesting article, and Shopify did a study, and they basically analyzed 37 million social media visits, of which 529,000 orders came from that. And I think that statistic is really staggering because that's relatively high conversion rates if you look at it. And what they also said it was that Facebook dominated in this, and 2/3 of the orders came from Facebook.
Yeah, and I think just to add on there, Akino, I think in some of the research we've been doing, because social media correlates very closely with just the adoption of the mobile space, and so I think it was just last year that mobile users on the web surpassed traditional kind of desktop, laptop users, and last year around Christmas time, Amazon saw 40% of their purchases coming in-app. Which, that's not a social media play, but they were driving a lot of that traffic via social media from the mobile phone into their app stores or into their purchasing app. So, yeah, just to kind of pile on what Akino was saying, it's definitely a tidal wave, and it's definitely a trend that I think we'll only continue to see grow.
Thanks, Kyle. Here's another question. With regard to social media squatting, how many brand owners acquire accounts or pages or handles efficiently and safely? On most platforms, each handle must correspond to a different email address, which presents a security issue.
Yeah, so I can take this one. We do have partners that we work with in the social media space to acquire handles in bulk. It does get tricky when you want to acquire, say you're looking to secure 5 or 6 or 15 different kind of variations of your brand name on the social media site. But in those instances, particularly as a trademark holder, we can work with the social media network to figure out a solution. So we have clients, that will register not across one network, but across many networks, 100, 200, or even 300 names at a time. So there's ways to do it, and we're happy to help.
Great, thanks, Kyle. So that kind of segues into the next question. Does the MarkMonitor social media module decipher problematic sites or all mentions of a monitored brand?
Yeah, so part of what the module does is correlates back to some of the best practices that we talked about, right? So we're out there searching on keyword terms across a wide swath of social media networks, looking for your brand name, and then once we pull back results, we scan those results and look for, is that a known piece of content, or is that a known sort of benign post, or is your brand name being used in a way that's driving people to some link on a counterfeit website? So the answer is, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, we've got a whole process around how we engage that within our social media module.
And another related question, do you have a special relationship or channel with social media sites to get things taken down quicker than sending an email, filling out a form, et cetera?
I'm not to hog the airwaves, so Akino, feel free to cut me off. But we do have an office here internally at MarkMonitor. There's a woman named Nancy Merritt. Her title is Global Partner Relations Manager. A lot of the relationships she manages are in the social media space, and we work closely with those social media providers, because at the end of the day, they don't want to see counterfeiting and fraud happening on their social media networks. So they know that we're out there sort of policing and searching the networks, and when we bring an issue to them, they generally want to be receptive.
Sorry, I was going to say, Kyle, that's you couldn't have said it better. Perfect answer.
So another question, is it possible to search for images or logos on social media sites through the portal?
Yeah, so we do have image matching technology. Image matching is challenging. We are growing that capability, but we do have the ability to match images and look for either, so it's hard. So sometimes we'll match an image and we'll say, yeah, it's a one-to-one match. Now we need to know, is that an affiliate or a partner? Is that image actually just happened to match, but it's being used appropriately? Or we can also do something where we match images and say, yeah, it matches closely, but it's slightly altered. And that's when we can usually tell that someone is using it for counterfeit or fraud or some other means. So yeah, we have an image matching capability, and I can say from the product side, that's something that we're monitoring closely and looking to really build out that technology over time, because as we all know, social media is very much a visual, image-based interaction with limited text.
Okay, great. Here's another question. I've noticed some Facebook pages that can't be viewed in our geographical area. Is there a way to view the pages that are blocked? Can I use a proxy? Yes.
So we run into this issue quite a bit, not only in our social media module, but our marketplaces module and websites as well, right? So there's content of all flavors across the globe, and there's different countries, some of them more open, some of them more closed, where you run into a literal wall. And so we use, globally distributed proxy services to get in country and view the appropriate geographical content. So yeah, your best bet is to use a proxy to get at that content.
All right. Another question. Do you have any experience with Tumblr? What are best practices for enforcement on there?
So we do have experience with Tumblr. I'm going to throw this one over to Akino in a second, but I can say from a on the enforcement side. On the monitoring side, we have the ability to monitor, search and monitor Tumblr. Off the top of my head, I don't know if we have an automated enforcement policy with Tumblr through our system or if that's handled relationally. And I don't know, Akino, if you know that or not, but we could find out.
Yeah, and I was actually going to chime in by saying that, you know, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, freedom of speech. There's always that fine line that we need to be cognizant of. So definitely something that we're monitoring and enforcing, but there's always that fine line to allow people freedom of speech. And, you know, if it is hurtful and truly harmful and not legitimate, that is definitely something that you should be enforcing on. But yes.
Do you monitor social media in various languages?
So right now we primarily monitor social media in English from an automated perspective. We do have the ability to recognize special characters in different languages. We are growing a service in China, so we have a team, in Asia I should say. We've got teams in Japan and China that are doing a little bit more manual review. But yeah, so we've got limited language ability from an automated perspective. Interestingly, we see that, and I don't know the exact statistics, so I'm not going to hard quote it, but there's a majority of the content created is in English right now. But as you know, adoption grows in China, in India, in Brazil, all the BRIC countries, that there will be a tipping point there where that's not the case.
Okay. Another question here. Out of the ones that you've listed, what is the most common type of abuse you've seen?
Akino, what's the most common abuse that you see? I've got
So I think counterfeit and impersonation for sure are the top two that comes to mind. And for the financial, and the answer obviously varies depending on the industry that we're looking at and talking about, but the other one, especially for the financial institution, I do start seeing like the hashtag phishing problem emerging more and more. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it does vary by industry. Specific to your example to financial, I spend a lot of my time with more of our consumer goods and electronics clients. So they're much more prone to impersonation and counterfeiting. Counterfeiting being complete knockoff products or issues in their supply chain where products are hitting the gray market without their knowledge. So some of it depends on your vertical. Some of it depends on, it's easier, kind of the easiest route for fraudsters is to steal your, copy your brand identity, impersonate you, and then sell counterfeit goods. Or counterfeit, impersonate you to drive traffic to fraudulent links.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Here's one. Most of the sites you showed have a formal enforcement policy, but I know there are hundreds of social media sites worldwide. How do you handle sites that don't have an enforcement policy?
Yeah, so we prioritize sites in our modules that have an enforcement policy for the exact reason that we want our clients to be able to not only search and monitor, but then enforce on activities that they deem impactful to their brand. We are constantly trying to build relationships with sites that don't have an official enforcement policy, and that's where that team I just discussed earlier comes into play with the relationship management. And then, so we actually just got back from our annual user forum, and it's interesting talking to our clients, many of which actually you look at the name, the company on their name badge, and they should be competitors. They are competitors against each other. But when it comes to dealing with these kinds of issues, they join forces. So oftentimes, it's, we'll see even our own clients maybe teaming up and going to a social media site or a marketplace and saying, look, this is a massive issue. It's causing us problems. How do we work together to get this solved? And we're happy to kind of take the lead on that conversation and build momentum with the marketplace.
All right, here's one more question. Besides complaints to the social media sites, are there any other enforcement mechanisms besides litigation that a brand owner can pursue to protect its rights?
Yeah, so I mean, you have the complaint. I guess you're saying if there's not an official, because a lot of sites do have an official mechanism, right, where you can say my trademark is infringed, my copyrights are being infringed upon, there's counterfeiting happening. So if they don't have those official avenues to protect or avenues to explore, then litigation or the threat of litigation tends to be the most powerful avenue. And what's hard is, and Akino, feel free to contradict me if I speak incorrectly, but what's hard is, sites that don't have enforcement mechanisms, so sort of then become the de facto counterfeiting sites, right? Because people know that they can get away with whatever they can get away with on those sites, whereas on the more mainline sites, if there is an enforcement mechanism, they've got to work a lot harder to stay ahead of being enforced upon.
So here's, we got a lot of questions come in, so I'm going to just ask a couple more. With hashtag phishing in mind, what rights do brand owners have to request that a social media platform disclose information used to register an account? So an account handle profile that has committed fraud against their brand.
So if there is any fraudulent activities happening on social media platforms, it's absolutely important to report it and enforce on it. And social media sites, I mean, thus far has cooperated and collaborated and definitely have taken it down.
Yeah, and one thing from a product perspective, I know we're talking about kind of the brand owner's rights at getting that information. One thing that we're trying to do from a product perspective, and I underscore that we're trying because it's a work in progress, but we're trying to use sort of data science and correlation to find known counterfeiters or known hashtag fishers and build a profile around those people so that when they register a new handle on a social media network, we may recognize the email address that they used to register it, or we may recognize the IP it's coming from or the ISP that they're using and try to correlate those so we can have more leverage with those social media networks and provide more information to the brand about how to go get what we would call, a high-value target.
Thanks so much, Kyle and Akino. So we've had a lot of great questions come in. The presenters will follow up with you after, so we're coming up on time here. But that was a great presentation. We really appreciate you guys sharing your experiences as well as some best practices for the audience today. I'd also like to thank everyone tuning in for their participation. We had so many good questions that really helped draw out more information for those listening in. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days. So just be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in and have a great day.